Great morning, humans. Great morning, world. Great morning, Monday. Great morning to this week ahead. So, welcome to Make Sense Mondays. This is your boy, Dr. JC Doornick, aka the Dragon. Just quickly, today's focus. This is an interesting one I'm very passionate about. I think one that's going to be very useful for you. We're going to make sense of something called brain awareness perception. You'll know what that is soon enough. But the idea is the goal of today is to help people take note of this complicated and powerful, coiled up piece of wet meat that is sitting in our skull. The only place in the human body completely protected by bone, sitting up there. And this thing is somehow running the show, being the shot caller without you. With or without you. So that's what we're going to take note of that today. Becoming aware of this and, just uncovering the potential influence that this has, your thoughts and your feelings and all of these things going on within your brain is very, very powerful, because what it does is it represents and it validates the reason why you might want to take a look under the hood. So that's the focus for today. But just a little bit about Make Sense Mondays and myself. I see people coming in. Great morning. I love that. Such a great way to start the day. Great morning, Chris. Great morning to you, Susan. Great morning, Kathy. Remember, wherever you're watching this, if you're watching it live on social media, you can push share it with your friends, pay it forward. I think that this is a much more valuable conversation to have on Monday morning than the one that was going to boot up in your head. And then if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, the Rise Up with Dragon YouTube channel, where we put our Make Sense Mondays up there. You can interact with us in the comments as well. Great morning, Vicky. All right, great. So Make Sense Mondays, just real quickly, because this is coming at you. This is something that you can count on every week on Mondays. It's a weekly live morning show that, just as I said, you can count on. Not a lot of things we can count on that are positive these days, except for the fact that you're up today and you seem to have been granted another 24 hours. But it's a live morning show that happens on Mondays each week, and you can count on it. And it's here to help you claim control of your day and your week, and thus potentially your life. So what we do is we focus on, with Make Sense Mondays, we focus on discussions that arm and equip you basically with highlights from the podcast episode that drops every Monday from the Make Sense with Dr. JC Doornick Podcast. So there's a new episode that just dropped today on brain awareness perception. So we're basically going to take the highlights of it, but do it raw and live in a sense, and interact with people. Great morning, Paula. Great morning, Colleen. So if you guys have questions during it, those questions will be addressed or comments in the live format, but also be on the recording. These typically last about 30 minutes. So it's kind of like a short form highlight reel of the podcast episode. And just so you know, it's not something that I script. So just going to give you my thoughts for the day. And the powerful, notion of doing something like this on a Monday morning is just take note of the fact, and this is kind of a good segue into understanding the power of the brain. Your brain very much is like a computer, and just like me, when we woke up this morning and you went from unconscious to conscious, your brain woke up and it has this knack, just like your computer, of booting up. Now think about your computer when you push, when you open up your laptop, as I did this morning, or you go from off to on, offline to online, and you boot up your computer. Think about what it's booting up. It's booting up software and hardware, but that is a program that you ended yesterday. So in essence, a computer boots up yesterday, right? Your brain works the same way. Your brain doesn't boot up. I mean, your brain might have thoughts about the day and the future ahead, but its baseline, its booting up is yesterday. So that's potentially dangerous, right? So that's kind of a little bit of brain awareness perception, as we get into this, because that's just being aware of the fact that that happens. But if yesterday was challenging, or if yesterday you maybe had some people say some things that, offended you, or Maybe you got a bill or something didn't go your way. Maybe it was a letdown, a setback, or a frustration or something like that. When you move from unconscious to conscious this morning, that's what's happening is you're rebooting that up. So the idea of Make Sense Monday and being aware of that is maybe you and I can just have a discussion here right now about right now, right? Gain this conscious moment. Because as you know, another little fine point that we talk about in the podcast episode is the fact that 95% of our brain, and this is just what we know. And what's funny about the idea of claiming that we know things, all this science and all this research about the human brain, the same concepts that we use to claim that we know things, right, are occurring in this wet piece of meat that, for the most part, is happening whether we know it or not. Isn't that a funny idea? I'm trying to set the stage for you today to recognize that we're not really sure who's in control of our thoughts, feelings, and actions. We make assumptions, like we say that the brain is 95% controlled by us, by our subconscious mind, and 5% controlled by us. But you got to question, is that 5% of conscious time that we have actually controlled by us? Because isn't it influenced by the 95%? So this is a fascinating conversation because it gives you the ability and it validates steps in what I call the interface response system. When you start to acknowledge this stuff, it might be potentially scary for you at first. It might be a little bit overwhelming for you to think about this. But that's not the point of this first episode of this 4-part sequential process that I call the interface response system. The point of expressing and acknowledging, how powerful the brain is and how it works and how it could be faulty, is it validates the idea of maybe just stopping and thinking for a little bit. One of the things that I go into in length in this podcast episode is just the acknowledgement of how we consciously hand over the keys to our subconscious mind. Think about that today. If you know right in this space that 95%, let's just go with science here for a second. If you know that 95% of your thoughts, feelings, and actions today are going to go on autopilot, right? And you just have this 5% window. Maybe you're experiencing that 5% window right now. If you have this 5% window of hypothetically conscious, voluntary decision-making time, right? That means that 95% of the day is going to go on autopilot. Can you see how we volitionally just trust that our subconscious mind will handle things? So I just want to make sure that people become aware of that, because then you can begin to dispute things. And I'll give you an example of some of the powerful tools that you can use in your day to day. Now, as I'm explaining to you right now, there's a 4-part sequential series called the Interface Response System. Today, this is Make Sense Monday, and you're watching me just kind of like go over it raw right now for 30 minutes. But the podcast episodes go into it more in depth and more sequentially. So today would be day 1 of the 4 series. But then the book, when it comes out, Makes Sense, Solving the Mysteries of Why Shit Happens, coming out soon, goes into it even in more length. So this is kind of just a highlight reel of me just discussing things. And I'm looking to stimulate you on a Make Sense Monday to just recognize some things that could help things go better today. So in any case, let's get into the concept, the overview of this idea of the interface response system. It's based on 2 things. It's based on the premise that we recognize that we're not really in control of things that happen, right? I think we've heard this, and this makes a lot of sense. It's this idea that we don't control events. We don't control outcomes as much. We can leverage outcomes, but for the most part, just like 95% of the brain is unconscious, 95% or more of what is going on in the world is out of our control. The only thing that we really do control is our response, right? How we end up looking at things, forming opinions about things, and reacting. That's really the only thing that we're legitimately in control of. So that's one thing. That's one reason why I created the interface response system, was to help people claim control of a more effective and efficient response system. So that's one reason. The second one is this, and this is the more complicated one, and perhaps we'll go into a little bit of why this is so complicated. We have this piece of meat in our head. I call it a piece of meat because I just think it's so funny how, the most sophisticated computer and operating system known to man, more sophisticated than anything that you're acknowledging with computers and AI and virtual reality and all that stuff, for many, many reasons. The human brain is this mystery, and it's the most sophisticated piece of technology that there is. But it's just like a muscle, right? It's just meat, right? It's just wet piece of meat coiled up in your head. And it somehow neuronally has the ability, with different areas of your brain, for the most part involuntary, right, to, perceive things, communicate. I call the brain and your six senses the sense-making machine. So we're walking around all day, and we have this ability to perceive things and make opinions and look at things and decide, on a multitude of things. And all of those things are basically swaying and controlling our response. So here we are saying that the only thing that we control is our response. But to what degree do we really control our response if we just let our programming run? And when I say the word program, I've spoken about this a lot on the podcast. So if you want to follow the podcast, it's called Make Sense with Dr. JC Doornick Podcast. Very easy to find. You'll see the glasses, and it says the things that make you go, which is going to be the cover of the book as well. But we often talk about this other component. It's like we're saying maybe it's not a good idea to just hand the keys over to our regularly scheduled program, because, like who's controlling that program? Are you really controlling that program? Because if you look at the way that the brain is programmed, it's through consistency and consumption. Look at what we're consistently consuming in this world today. And then you go back to the formative years that lead you right up to now, and your programmers were responsible for your brain. And remember, Hebb's theory is neurons that fire together wire together. So think about this brain and all of its capacity to make decisions and perceive and all of those things that are happening that we hand the keys over to. And just consider that your mother, your father, your teacher and preacher, which may be wrong, right? I mean, they were just, when people like that pass on lessons and education and life lessons to us, they're just doing what they were taught. That's their best guess of what it is. So, you might find yourself having a religious preference or a political preference, or just a preference about life in general, right? Are things good right now? Or are things bad? So all of those things are happening with your sense-making machine in this brain. But now we've just recognized that our mother, father, teacher, and preacher played a very big role, especially during the formative years, of controlling and programming our brain. So that's an interesting thing for you to think about today, is when you create something like an opinion or a perception of something, in that moment, you're thinking, because you've handed the keys over and trusted this automatic system that's happening 95% of the day, you're thinking that it's almost like an illusion that you're making those decisions. But brain awareness perception is this idea of saying, well, I understand how the brain works, but now I'm also very, very cognizant of the fact that my brain's been programmed by others: mother, father, teacher, and preacher. And then add into that, on top of that, this is what we're discussing in step one in the podcast. Listen to the podcast. It's about a 35-minute podcast, and you'll really, really grasp it. When the book comes out, it'll be even more so. It's just about acknowledging these things. Now, here's the funny thing about acknowledging them. Right now, if you're with me and we're having this conversation and you're going, yeah, you know what? If you might be saying, hell no, just because you don't want to deal with it, right? been there. Or you might be saying, interesting, maybe, or you might be saying, yeah, that makes total sense. I've been thinking about that. So I'd love to hear in comments where you stand with this idea of acknowledging that your thoughts, feelings, and actions might be influenced by others and therefore unconsciously prompting you to believe that you're making decisions today. However, they're just an illusion of you thinking that the decisions that your brain is making are yours. Why is that important? Now, if you really think about that right now, and just the idea of thinking about it is questionable. So listen, at the end of the day, have fun with this. I mean, we're not really sure what aspects of life are real or a simulation right now. Just enjoy your day. But here's the premise of it. If you really think about this stuff, what it does is, like I said before, it validates you disputing it. Now, the reason why that's important is if something happens today and I get bummed out or frustrated or scared or experience things like anxiety and there's some thoughts in my head and I'm worried about them. If you experience or practice brain awareness perception, which is the first step of this interface response system, it's just you saying, maybe that's just my brain thinking. So when you acknowledge that your brain does what it does, and then it's also been influenced and programmed by others, it validates this idea that you can dispute it. You understand? So psychologists refer to this as cognitive distancing, which is step 2, is the idea of pausing, putting a pause on your thoughts, feelings, and actions or opinion about something that's going on, right? You'd put a pause on it, but you'd have to have a reason to pause. Remember, if you handed the keys over and trusted your operating system today, which is going to happen without you knowing it for 95% of your day, then during those 95%, moments, your brain is just like a sleepwalker. And I want to get into that. Because when somebody's sleepwalking, this is interesting. And I go over the science of this. There's some amazing people doing studies, just to name a couple of Mazarin, Banaji, and Yuri Mayos. I speak about those and I put those references in there. As a matter of fact, in the podcast episode, I put those references. What they're doing some sleep study, experiments that show that when somebody like goes to sleep, hypothetically unconscious, and then gets up and walks around and goes down. I don't know if there's any sleepwalkers here, let me know if you're a sleepwalker, but we do all of these things. One of the most complicated things for a human being to do is walk and experience and practice balance, right? So we do all of those things. And during the sleepwalking process, this is once again validating that your brain doesn't necessarily need you to make decisions. And identifying that your brain might have been influenced by your mother, father, teacher, preacher, what you're consuming every day in society, and then throw evolution into that, what's been paid forward by running from saber-toothed tigers and all that. That's the program that you're just saying, here, you guys handle things. And what we identify with sleepwalkers, this is fascinating, is this idea that they can do all of those things: pour cereal, drink dishwasher soup, pour milk over their head. Some sleepwalkers go out and start their car, right? Completely void of them having anything to do with that. So what's interesting about these types of studies that I cite is it just further helps you understand and question who's controlling who, right? Are you controlling your brain? Well, maybe like if you go by science, maybe for 5% of your day, but 95% of your day, your brain is controlling you. So another interesting study that I saw is, I forget the guy's name, but it's in the podcast. There's one study going on about this concept of agency. Agency would be this idea of acknowledging your power to make decisions and control outcomes, right? So you're an agent, right, of your actions. That's what agency means. But there's people that dispute that because of all this stuff I'm talking about and say, well, to what degree do we really have agency, right? Is that an illusion that we have agency? And this guy says that the only agency that a human being truly has, according to what he can see from his experience, is that they can consciously right? So this is the idea of consciously making a decision, volitionally, consciously make a decision to give the keys over to the subconscious. Isn't that fascinating? Is this idea of like, we think that if somebody says stand up and sit down, I can right now say I'm going to stand up and then I'll sit down. So the illusion in my head is that I decided to do this. Now, I'm not telling you that I buy into everything. I'm just sharing with you some insights to help you understand that you might not know what you're doing, which is a great place to be, because then you don't have to get tethered to all these ideas that distract you and bum you out. But the illusion of agency in these research programs, they expose to us that all you're doing when you stand up and sit down is you're giving your automatic nervous system and your subconscious, this autopilot that knows how to stand up and sit down, permission. So they're talking about this tip of the iceberg, this idea of conscious time that we spend when we voluntarily make decisions. It just being us handing over the keys to something that knows how to handle everything. It's just an interesting concept. Once again, the whole premise of the first phase of the interface response system is to validate the reason to take your time today, to just think about things. You might, until you know about this, and that's what it means to have brain awareness perception, or in other words, program awareness perception, or sense-making awareness perception, meaning being aware of how those things happen and the fact that they're running right now. If you think about it right now, it means you're acknowledging that it's happening right now. If you're not thinking about it right now, right, and you don't have awareness of it, then it's running without you being aware of it. Why is that important? Because in that moment, and if you're here in this moment with me right now, in that moment, it gives you an insight that something is going on that might be the culprit to you making bad decisions, unhealthy decisions. You know, what's funny is I'm a transformational health coach. So I help a lot of people with weight loss and nutrition and things like that. And the perception, I mean, look at the statistics. Most people do not follow through with their eating programs, their exercise programs, drinking water, reading a book every day. We all know what we need to do to improve our life. I mean, there's nobody here right now that can tell me they don't know some things that they could start practicing with consistency that would enhance their life, their physical, their mental, and their financial. We all know that. We all want the same things, and we all know that. Why don't we follow through? So we enter this world of saying, oh, I'm not motivated. I have terrible willpower, or there's too many distractions in life, right? I think that those are just excuses that excuse you from the truth that your brain is not programmed to follow those things through. So what would you do? What would you do? You would have to come up with strategies and systems, which is the whole reason that you might acquire a coach or enter a community. Another rise up that I'm doing right now is just this whole observation of communities. It's fascinating how we create communities. It's a double-edged sword. Sometimes we create communities. I'm kind of getting off the topic, but this is fascinating. We create communities as a way of kind of like recalibrating the fact, like if you're having a rough time in life, or you're out of shape, or you smoke or something like that, you're not going to hang around with a community of people that are super healthy. You're going to go create your own community, like almost like a cult, to recalibrate and be normal. Right. So there's that. And then there's the other side, possibly the proactive side, where we will decide that we want to follow through for a change. Hardest thing for human beings to do is follow through because of all this stuff that we're talking about. So what we'll do is we'll take proactive steps to create a community of like-minded people that are in support. And what we're basically doing when we do that is shutting out anything otherwise, making anything that's not in support of what we want, it no longer applies. It's irrelevant. So there are ways of doing that, but the premise of this first step of the interface response system, it's so crucial. And if you're feeling right now, by listening to this Make Sense Monday, if you're feeling right now that this is exhausting and it's too much, or perhaps in your brain, and this is a fun little game to play, in your brain right now, if you're feeling like ideas in your head that I don't know what I'm talking about, or this is preposterous, this is crazy, or you're starting to practice what we call cognitive bias right here in this moment. And you're starting to say, oh, well, I read something that says that this is not true. Here's what that means. That's your program, right? That's your 120,000 ton oil tanker that is going this way. And here in this conversation right now, I'm offering you something in the idea of saying, hey, let's turn this thing around and go a new direction, right? Very hard to do. So if you're having some of those feelings of doubt or frustration, or maybe you're just saying like, this guy's out of his freaking mind, that's your program trying to get you right back on course to run your regularly scheduled program. So the question I would have is this: can you see maybe how a lot of the things that I'm sharing about the human brain and how it's been influenced and programmed and how it's making the calls of your day, the shot caller of your day, without you, sleepwalking example, right? And how it might be faulty. Might. Just use the word might. Is there a chance that your program is potentially faulty? And is there value in disputing your thoughts, feelings, and actions, and considering? Think about what the word consider means. It just means to be curious of a better way, right? Curiously considering taking a right turn instead of a left if it provides you with a better outcome. So if you're not open to that, it's just a sign and a symptom of how powerful the programmed mind is. The programmed mind is so powerful that if it identifies something that is adverse to what it's used to doing, it will actually seek out only things to confirm that it's a bad idea, and going your way is a good idea. If you're experiencing that right now, that is the pinnacle of what I'm talking about. Isn't that interesting? If you're open and curious and you say something like maybe, right? And you look at this and say, hey, this is something worth checking out. What that does is it grants you permission to take the second step of the interface response system, which, remember, is to create a better outcome, right? To create a better life, decide, sort through what matters and what doesn't, and have a better thing that you control, your response. That's why you would want to do this. But if you're in this moment right now and you're saying, maybe, interesting to think about this, maybe I'm not in control of my thoughts, feelings, and actions. Well, first of all, that's a wonderful place to be, because if you're in a bad mood right now, or you're depressed, or you feel, I'm not talking about clinically, but if you feel that things have not been going your way, you might be wrong. So that's the first thing. But more importantly, it validates and it gives you that reason. Human beings don't do anything without reason, right? We're value-seeking missiles. Even if you do something stupid today, counterproductive, you have a reason to do it, and you've perceived that it's a good idea. So if you have a reason, because you recognize some of these things that I'm saying are interesting and worth checking out, taking a look under the hood, it validates you today taking that pause, which is next week's episode called The Pause. So why am I doing this? For one thing, I created the interface response system so that I wouldn't have to teach you guys how, I go from messed up to blessed up. I've had a very, very interesting life, experienced a lot of dark times, and systematically was pushed and forced into creating these systems and structures to have a better, healthier response system. I don't want you guys to have to wait 52 years. Some of you don't have 52 years, right? So I created this 4-step interface response system as a way of taking all of what I've experienced and the science of my research and creating just a simple 4-step process. I'm going to teach that over the next 4 days. But the real reason I'm doing it is it comes from a place of paying it forward. When you've experienced how tough life can be, and then the joy of moving from the dark into the light, there's nothing better than offering that to somebody else. So when I teach these things, I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to label or project what I think onto you, right? I like to, and this is what my whole podcast is about. You'll see, if you listen to the podcast, you'll know all we do is make sense of things, which means we look at all sides of things, right? We don't make decisions. We just take everything into account in our decision-making process. I'm interviewing someone today for a future episode on the topic of serial killers. Think about how your brain automatically, your program thinks about serial killers. You'll be shocked at that discussion. But that's why I'm paying this forward to you, because if you can learn how to practice brain awareness perception, you can let yourself off the hook as thinking that everything is your responsibility. We talk a lot about responsibility, right? Taking responsibility for your life. How do you do that when your brain is not programmed for that? You have to learn how to go through a sequential step of things. And that's what I'm going to teach everybody, how to make sure that you put yourself in control of that over time. It takes a lot of time. It took me 52 years of practicing, but I'm going to be able to accelerate that for people. So just a quick thanks to our sponsor. Everything that we do, our cost-free environment, our podcast, things like this, is all sponsored by one of my wife's passion projects called the Make Sense Academy. Make Sense Academy is just this private community that is intended. It's a psychological safe haven where people can come in and experience a lot of these types of lessons and learn the skills and tools to become the dominant creators and forces in their life, right? To become the person that starts to follow through, become more conscious. So I just want to give credit to that. The only reason we can provide the podcast and this is the Make Sense Academy funds it. And that's my wife Mika's passion project that I come alongside and help her with. So if you'd like to check out the Make Sense Academy, just DM us community and we will send you information to that. Our group is growing. We see a lot of the people here that are part of that group. We meet every morning. We've got all these online courses and all sorts of fun stuff in there, and growing. And there's business growth and networking and all kinds of stuff in that psychological safe haven. If you're curious and you want to try it risk-free, just write community and we'll send you information on that. So 8:30. Have a wonderful day. This has been a Make Sense Monday. If you go to riseupwithdragon.com and sign up for our newsletter, and that'll be in the notes of this video as well. These videos come every week on Tuesdays in our newsletter, along with my wife, and she does all these wonderful lessons on boundaries and meditations and things like that. So have a wonderful day. I hope that things go your way now that you're in control. Bye-bye now.